Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we're joined by Tom Breeze, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Doccla, which is Europe's leading virtual hospital. Prior to that, he was at Vatica, he was at Babylon, and he's a commercial experienced leader. And what I loved about your bio is, you've experience of scaling hypergrowth startups from seed to multi-billion dollar listings, which is an incredible feat and such an awesome experience I've had so far in your career. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Tom. How are you doing?
Doing really well. It's a delight to be here. Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to meet you both.
So
Amazing.
we want to kind of go all the way back, let's say a young Tom, right? And I've been doing a bit of LinkedIn stalking, as I do with all the guests. And I saw this stint in Beijing, right? Which is on the other side of the world. Let's start from there up until kind of present day. So tell us a bit more about how you ended up in Beijing.
That was a very, very strange time in my life. So I was still a university student at the time. So I was doing an English lit degree at Cambridge. And to pay my way, I was doing some case law edits for somebody who's working at Queen Mary's University, London. So they were teaching a law course, and I'd go and make notes on some case law stuff for them, and they'd pay me whatever it was, 20 quid a case law edit, something like that. And after a little while, they said, "Hey, look, we're working with Beijing University of Posts and Telecommunications. There's two. There's a famous one, Peking University, and there's BUPT, which, with all due respect to them, is a little less well known internationally. They wanted to do an exchange program where they brought in somebody from the UK as a bit of a cheerleading project to talk about critical thinking to their engineering students. So I went out there as probably a 20-year-old or something, 20-year-old undergraduate, and tried to teach as an English student a load of engineers how to do critical thinking. I mean, you talk about like Emperor's New Clothes or whatever. I didn't have much of a clue what I was doing. Thankfully, I would note that the quality of comprehension of the English language was relatively low in that course. So most of the people didn't know what I was saying anyway. So it was fine. But it was a really, really is a funny old time. Always good to kind of go back to basics and challenge yourself on critical thinking. But in all honesty, I don't know if I was the right guy for the job.
No, it's incredible, and it's always surprising and wonderful where life often takes you. Tell us a bit more about kind of your stint in the corporate world. I know we're going to come into health tech. We'll probably spend most of the podcast talking about it, but kind of the corporate world, private equity, consultancy, and more interestingly, how did you kind of enter the world of health?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated, and what guys do that graduate with English lit degrees, they become teachers. I'd have been a terrible teacher. They become lawyers. I really didn't want to be a lawyer for a load of reasons, although I've spent enough time with contracts in the last decade to maybe feel like I should have been one after all. Just a bad one, probably again. Or you can go do something completely different. So I'd spent lots of time looking at words, and I decided if I was going to make a career of it, then maybe I'd start looking at some numbers instead. And private equity felt like an excite. You don't have a big idea of what you want to do at university, do you? You just think like, okay, exciting, the city, there'll be deals and things like that, and so I went to go do that without having a huge idea, to be honest, what I was signing up for. I feel like I'm building up a picture of some clueless university student at the moment, and that's about right, to be honest. When I got there, I realized a couple of things. I realized, one, that the people there had typically done a stint learning some skills somewhere else, whether they'd been in investment banking, say, or whether they'd been in management consultancy, which is what I went to go do afterwards. And two, I realized that there are deals and there are deals, and you can spend your whole time working in particular lucrative sectors. You could go do warehousing if you like, that can be a whole life. Or you can try and direct yourself at something that you're passionate about. And to that end, I thought healthcare, so many people have such a personal relationship with healthcare. You have family stories, all the rest of it. There'll be nobody who isn't grateful to the health system for something, right? And so I saw these folks with their management consultancy style skills, and the way that they'd come on a lot from this clueless university student that I was at that point. And and I also saw that they were working in an industry that I was passionate about in healthcare, and that was the next move. It was, okay, I'm probably not just going to do a purely financially motivated thing for the rest of my life. So let's see if I can go pick up some skills in management consultancy. Let's see if I can do it in an industry that I care about. And so that's what I ended up doing at what was then called 2020 Delivery. It was kind of McKinsey spin-off, what's now called the Public Service Consultancy. Yeah, that's where I found myself afterwards.
Tom, with regards to consultancy, right? A question on what did you think it was when you were going into it as a student, and what was it in reality? Because we're living in a time where a lot of doctors are thinking about making career pivots, and we think consultancy is one thing, but in reality it's something else. So tell us what it's like from the insider point of view.
Yeah, so yeah, my learnings here are whatever, a decade out of date or so, but it's a broad church. So what we were doing there is we were doing a few different things. To give you an example, day one, more or less, was in a branded red polo shirt doing a pro bono project in A&E, and I felt horribly exposed. There's an English lit grad stood in A&E, taking down time and motion studies, see what's going on, see if there are any opportunities to optimize. And actually, it was kind of reassuring for me. I think some very lovely clinical and non-clinical staff there made us feel welcome, but also you realise fairly early on that there's a whole load of frustration because people know that there's loads of things they want to change. Clinicians, general managers, whoever it is, they know there's loads of stuff they want to change, but they don't have the time, the energy to write it up, to size it. Where should we start? What's the business case for it? So actually, it was that stuff we were helping with. We weren't necessarily coming up with the world's most incredible or innovative ideas, but we were making sure that there was a path to getting the ideas out of people's heads and into production. So that'd be one thing. Then on the other side, you might be doing something like I worked on a big project in Southwest London for a while to look at, based on all of the available data we have, how many hospitals do you need in 20 years' time? All sorts of kind of different, and what type of hospitals. And that's a hugely political arena. So there's a lot of, sort of kind of when an election cycle, could you realistically make any decisions? It was a really interesting new thing for me. Because people certainly don't like having their hospitals closed down, and it was also my first brush with major scale irony in the business world, which was, I remember we got written up in Private Eye. I don't know if you guys read Private Eye, but got written up in Private Eye for the project we were doing, saying, hey, they spent this money on management consultants, and the management consultants told them, don't knock down any hospitals. You're going to need more hospitals soon, so don't knock down the ones you have now. And they're like, this is a colossal waste of time, energy, cash. And you think, hang on a second, if we'd advised them to knock it down and then to build another one, that would have been an even bigger waste of money. So yeah, it's kind of like maybe sometimes not doing something, not taking drastic action is the right thing after all. I'm sure there's a more efficient way to that decision, but nonetheless, the advice not to knock things down was probably the right thing.
It reminds me of that saying, right? No one gets fired for ever hiring McKinsey, right? You can't go wrong with these big, massive juggernauts. Tell us a bit more about the next phase of the journey. Very interested to hear your time at Babylon. You are there on its kind of rocket ship trajectory. Keen to learn kind of, you went in as a biz dev strategy NHS role, ended up being on the executive side on the commercials. Tell us about your time in Babylon, how you managed to work your way up. What were the things you've learned? And it might be a controversial thing, what were things that, think that could have been done differently for where we are today?
Yeah, sure. And clearly something, right? Because it's not been a wildly happy year for Babylon. So you acknowledge that right off the bat. But yeah, so I was really, really lucky. There's a guy who's the first hire in the possibly true first hire in the NHS team called Paul Bates, who previously had been a couple of things, been special advisor to David Cameron for healthcare, and he'd worked at and been one of the kind of founding members of the consultancy I'd been at. Though we didn't know each other at all then, but I knew of him by reputation, and he will have known that where I was working was a place of reasonable quality that hopefully hired sensible people. I have very high esteem for both the guys working there currently and all of my colleagues at the time. I thought they were great, actually. Paul is a really smart guy. He's now chief exec of the UK Space Agency,
Oh,
as a
wow.
former astrophysicist. So that's pretty cool. His gig as an astrophysicist. Later in life, he gets to run UK NASA. Like, good for him. He's a smart
Yeah.
guy. Um, but he's a pleasure to work with and for, and together we did a lot of work on kind of growing the NHS business with lots of other people involved too. But I was really lucky to be in at an early stage, and because of core part and early part of this growth, opportunities present. You're
Yeah.
launching GP at hand, which was a big thing in London. Big budget going out, changing a model of care, and by virtue of working hard and paying attention to the detail and making yourself useful, you get opportunities to go and expand that. We were involved in launching what was then, we believe, the largest rollout of healthcare AI in the world in North London, with the 111 service there. Again, that's kind of my project to own, and the concept of that being your project to own at that stage in your career, it could so easily have been otherwise. It's not everybody that gets a lucky break like that.
Yeah.
And then, there were international expansion opportunities, went to go do that, went to help set up in Canada. I did a whole load of work largely remotely for both Latin America and for Southeast Asia as well. And then selling. And one of the last positions that I finished up in was, again, really shaped me, was working as a chief of staff position. But it was working effectively, we had no chief commercial officer for some of that time. So Ali Parsos, the founder and chief exec of Babylon, was kind of covering that CCO role, and needed quite a lot of help to do that effectively. He's got a million and one things to do, right? Busy guys. At this stage, I joined, there's 130 people. At this stage, there's maybe 3,000 people working around the globe, and the business has got a few $1 billion worth of valuation attached to it. So he's got lots on. And there's just it's great privilege to learn from somebody who was really very frequently the smartest guy in the room. Is infuriatingly so, really deeply infuriatingly so. You're working on something for a while, he comes in, tears it up, and afterwards you look at it and you're like, it is better now. It is better now, but that is
Don't you
annoying.
just hate
On a
it?
personal level, that is annoying. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
definitely.
I'm always a bit like that too. So hopefully I absorb bits of bits of their wisdom, bits of their nous, and that was that was what Babylon was for me.
Before we move on from Babylon, you had this kind of rapid acceleration in terms of promotion and kind of working your way up to the senior leadership. What do you think you did well that helped you get to that stage to work directly with Ali Parsa, where other people in similar roles and similar startups can be like, do you know what? Tom did this. He accelerated his career in a short span of time. What worked for you? What did you think was helpful in that progression?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe three things here. First is luck. So let's acknowledge the importance of luck. There are plenty of people who are really good there, and who are smart and who are working hard, and who weren't, maybe joined a bit later, or were in a bit of the business that was going less well, benefited from less wise and supportive champions in the business than I did with, I mentioned Paul, for instance, earlier.
Yeah.
Hi, Paul, and thanks if you're out there. Then I'd say safe pair of hands. Say before anything else, particularly at an early stage in your career, somebody gives you something to do, then make sure that it gets done. And if it's not going to get done, make sure that they never find out about it from somebody else. They must find out about it from you. No, they can't have stuff going off into a black hole. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that goes with that is it's a slog. It's hard to be smarter than somebody, but it's relatively easier to work harder than they do. But you don't want to get too carried away on that, right? There's a limit to all things. But yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about. I want to move it into a little bit about commercialization, right? It's a topic that I think we all need to learn a little bit more about as entrepreneurs, coming up entrepreneurs, especially our listeners who are startup founders as well. We often build a product and we forget all about commercialization. We want to sell to the NHS, sell into healthcare, sell into all of these systems that are very, very difficult. When you're sort of starting out on a commercial sort of journey, how do you begin by mapping things out? How do you start to think about commercializing a product? Give us your insider tips here.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard in healthcare, and it's hard to come up with general rules in healthcare, because particularly in this country, people don't like to spend much money on their own healthcare, because we're used to NHS services. So from a kind of a B2C perspective, going out, it's really expensive to acquire people because they take a lot of convincing. And you know, that's probably better than the other way around, where you're in the US and people are happy to spend money on themselves, but they get really a terrible value healthcare system, and all of the problems we know about the US healthcare system. Not what I advocate for, right? Much better off over here. So first of all, there's that, and there's competing incentives everywhere. You know, take the UK, which has a relatively well-aligned system with the NHS and ICSs and acute trusts and all the rest of it. And there's a sensible kind of thought process that set that up. And then take, say, Germany, where you have it's a lot of state-funded healthcare, but you have a payer-provider split that again means you've got, you know, maybe you've got 15 different insurers spending money with the same hospital. Well, that means if you want to deal with an insurer to get something going at hospital, you've got to do 15 deals first. Incredibly painful. So whilst we can sometimes get frustrated, you know, this will be a UK focused audience, but whilst we can sometimes get frustrated with the difficulties of working with and the big beast that is the NHS, you should also take a time to, you know, be excited about a bit like democracy. It's kind of best of all the remaining options, best worst option, or whatever it is people say. But in terms of tips of how you actually go about commercialization, understanding those incentives. The reason I bothered to bore on about different incentive structures is because understanding those incentive structures is really, really important. What is the golden thread between, if this is going to need to go through finance, how is it that it reduces costs or increases revenue depending on the system you're in? If this is going to go through clinical, then what are the clinical outcomes that you're going to improve? Whose life is it going to make easier that they care about, etc., etc. You've really got to look for what are the individual motivators of the individual people that you're speaking with, and then eventually, hopefully, you should put that all together and go, all right, well, it works for doctors, it works for managers, it works for the finance guy. Chief strategy officer gets to feel pretty pleased because they're doing something new, innovative, exciting, and most importantly, is giving patients a better deal and improving outcomes. So tick, 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 and then you've got something that works. But if you forget even one of those groups, then you're in for a really long, hard grind of a sales process. Might be in for one of those anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are you able to give us an example of something that you've found very challenging to commercialize, and something that you found, you know what, this was a very seamless experience commercializing something? Are there any examples that you're able to share with us?
Can I just stop you there?
I could take.
I had this pun that came into my head where it was like, you know, something that felt like a breeze in the park, right? To commercialize, and then I realized your surname is Breeze.
I've never heard that one before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't say that truthfully, hand on heart, that anything's been a breeze to commercialize. But I mean, what's been better and what's been worse? So, regulation gets in the way a lot.
Yeah.
Like for good, right? It's there to protect patients. It's there to make sure that nobody does anything irresponsible and brings the classic kind of Facebook move fast, break things mentality to a place where you know, you must first do no harm. Those are the kind of the two competing camps, right? But when I look at when I was at Vatic, for instance, they created this amazing IP to really change the way that lateral flow tests work. It's pretty cool. It should have improved sensitivity and specificity quite a lot, and it should have allowed you to test after COVID, which it was originally kind of being rolled out for. Should have allowed you to test for all sorts of stuff that is not currently testable for in the same way. You'd otherwise need a massive system. But the problem is that getting all of that through effectively clinical trials is so time consuming, expensive, complex. It's hard, and we didn't get there in the end. You know, we signed some really big ticket deals, which I'm kind of proud of from a commercial perspective, but couldn't see them through, which I'm gutted about from a commercial perspective. So there you go. There's examples of
Yeah,
something working not so well.
no, I can completely understand that as well, because we're also navigating around the regulatory perspectives, and we've had our fair share of deals that have fallen through after so much slug. So I completely get that. Returning back to your journey now, so walk us through now. How do you then transition over into Doccla? What happens there? Virtual wards. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, so I had been working with VASIC for a bit, and we didn't get the emergency use authorization that you needed for these tests that we're doing. So that's with the FDA in America for listeners. And it didn't look like things were going to work out, and so I started looking at the next thing. And actually, there are loads of great businesses out there, and came pretty close to starting with one of them, and then got a call from somebody who used to work at Babylon and said, "Look, I've been at this place Doccla for a while. Here's what the general sense of it is. I know you say you're about to be starting another job, but you should take another look." So I took another look with him, and I was struck by a couple of things. One of them was the full force of obviousness of the idea.
Yes.
So just like if somebody said, "Hey, don't you think you should be able to order a taxi on your phone?" Like, yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to ring the guy up anymore. You just do it with a click. Sure. For Babylon, it was, "Do you think that people have more video consultations with doctors?" It's like, well, probably. Yeah, we might not be the guys to do it, but people are going to do that. It was the same with Doccla. It's like, hey, now that all the devices that used to require kind of heaps of cables and big piles of electronics, now they're like this big, now they're a few inches long, then shouldn't we just be sending patients home so they can have all this monitoring stuff happen to them where they are? Shouldn't we be monitoring them before they get to the front door in the first place? You just kind of go like, well, yeah, of course. And it doesn't even sound that complicated to do it. And of course, it turned out to be a lot more complicated than I thought at the time. But yeah, of course it is. If it had started off as a complicated idea, it probably would have been impossible. But simple idea became a bit more complex. But there you go. So that's the first thing, to give you long, wordy answers. The second thing was really was the team. So I met the team, and I was impressed with their backgrounds, with their clarity of thought, and also with a very different kind of business philosophy to Babylon. Say, Babylon at the heart of it. Hey, we're going to make this. I talked about teleconsultations earlier, because that was a bit that really patients got very excited about. That was the full force of obviousness bit. But what they were betting on was the creation of this incredible piece of IP, this amazing piece of world-changing AI. And as a consequence, they were saying, if you give us enough money, we will surely create this thing, and the world will be forever changed, and you'll receive incredible return on your investment. And the same was a bit true of this medical devices company I worked at, VASIC, right? We've got this super sexy IP. The world will be a different place after we've commercialized it. So take a bet on us, give us enough money, and all will be well in the world. Whereas Doccla doesn't have that philosophy. It has a philosophy of, we can prove value to you now. We will put in whatever services and problem-solving functions it takes for you to get that value as soon as possible. And we use that as the way to scale. And if you want us to do something else, we'll do that. Fine. If you want us to do another thing, we'll do that. If you want us to do something that's really outside our wheelhouse, then we won't do that. And we'll say, thank you very much. We're sorry. Here's maybe somebody else who can help. But it's a less volatile and more commercially sustainable way to run a business, because you're not taking these big sweeping bets all the time, saying we're going to double down on what we do. It already works. We'll give you more of it. We'll give the world more of it, rather than we're going to wait for a magic when everything is different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right about that, sort of when it makes absolute sense, right? So as a clinician, you see patients stuck on the wards and you're like, all we're doing is just monitoring. Why can't we get them out? See, it's simple as a clinician sitting on the wards thinking about that. But virtual wards, right, when it first came on, when Doccla was first on the scene, I don't think people got the common sense around it. Were there any challenges during the early days of adoption of saying we can actually send these guys home and reliably monitor them from home? What was your experience like during that time?
Yeah, so and of course we still get questions now as well, and they're broadly speaking always the same questions. It's just now we have a lot more evidence to fall back on,
Yeah.
to say, well, no, maybe these aren't this big a deal. So the big thing that we mentioned here is that I've been lucky with some bits of timing in my career. Doccla also has been lucky in that it really started to be launched just before COVID. And if there was ever a time where you really, really, really wanted to get patients out of hospital to be managed at home, my God, that was it.
That was it.
So that got rid of quite a few objections. Shouldn't we get this sustainable, this stable patient who's got COVID-19 home, so they're not getting worse strains of COVID-19 or infecting other people? And we've got, of course, the most acute bed challenges that the NHS has probably ever seen, outside of, well, the Second World War is pre-NHS, isn't it? But yeah. So that initially, we got going as research projects, and that took care of a lot of the objections that folks had. You're going under a clinical evaluation program, and the if you like, the kind of the ethical dilemma of what would happen to this patient otherwise. Well, otherwise this patient's going to be, one, there are patients who are going to die who are queuing up outside, and two, this patient's going to be sat in a room full of people with COVID-19. Like, let's get the hell out of there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you're right. The COVID pandemic, it did accelerate the adoption of a lot of remote technology in particular. I think Zoom and everything, we all did forcefully and happily adopt these platforms throughout the COVID pandemic. Moving now on to sort of the regulatory aspect, right? Talking about regulations around healthcare, commercial products, providing a service. Thinking again as an entrepreneur, right? Again, are you able to give us some insight into how do you get a product to be not only adopted by the NHS, but then to get buy-in from the consultants, the managers? How do you physically go out there and say, look, this is the idea I have, this is the product that I've got, this is the team, and this is the evidence we've got? How do you get them to all say yes to it?
Yeah, so I think it's about speaking their language. We don't have this cracked yet, is the one thing that I'd say. So we work really, really hard on it. I think it's one of the things that makes Doccla special is the effort that we put into behavior change.
Yes.
So whether that is matching clinicians with clinicians at other trusts that have seen this work well before, so it's an unbiased review. Whether it's spending time and energy with our clinical team, their clinical team, going through specific SOPs, spending time on site, sending a clinician around on site and saying, hey, respectfully, on your ward round, have you thought about that patient for virtual ward? Because they meet the criteria that we all agreed on. And generally it's, people are busy and they're being asked to do something new, and they go, oh, okay, yeah, or no, not that one for these 5 reasons, and leave me alone. That happens too. But yeah. So a lot of non-tech solutions there. People are people, and they need somebody to kind of take them through it, spend some time with them, and care. And then, of course, you've got to be doing something that's demonstrably better for them and their patients, right? But assume that whatever innovation you're talking about, you wouldn't be trying to roll it out if it wasn't better for patients and better for clinicians. So
I don't know if you talked about, because I missed it. I listened to this podcast with a startup based in America. I think they were doing kind of text messages, notifications. At one point, one of their biggest client was Uber. However, they felt because they didn't nurture that relationship, because they didn't look after them, because they didn't give them dedicated account managers, they end up losing that contract. And I wanted to ask, as Doccla gets bigger, starts to work with more and more hospitals and trusts, how do you continue nurturing that relationship? How do you continue to kind of foster that healthy collaboration such that, they don't feel they're kind of neglected and left out? So keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so really, really topical thing for us as we've been growing, because we've been growing a lot recently.
Yeah.
And we really want to make sure that we don't screw up. The people who trusted us to begin with, that we don't let them down ever. So that weighs really heavily on our mind. And there's a couple of things we can do. One is build the system in a way that is configurable. And as a result, when people have new requests and they want to do something different, it's easier for you to say yes. If everything requires you to go under the hood and spend engineering resource on, then like you're going to say no a lot, and eventually people are going to go, well, who are you saying yes to? You know, there's a bit of politics of envy there. So that's one bit. And the second is about a talent density is the phrase that investors use. It's like just hire good people. We still expect to spend people resource on our customers in the NHS, and it's really important that we keep our hiring standards high for that. Which I think the team, we call the team the delivery team in Doccla, I think they're really high quality folks. Several ex-clinicians in there, for instance, who are looking into career change and stuff like that. Really bright people who are properly motivated by this as a big change. So that's the second bit, I guess, that you can't design your way out of, is just hiring really good people and then looking after them.
No, I like that. And I think a lot of value and kind of growth comes in the qualities of the people you have, within the workforce. And I know a few of those roles you were talking about. The one thing I did want to ask was, a lot of companies struggle with hiring, and sometimes I feel like it makes or breaks you. What are the things they should be looking for? You guys are, I imagine, around Series A level. What is the things people should be looking out for when they get, these floods of candidates? Because a lot, to be fair, every other clinician is looking to leave the world of medicine, right? How do you kind of get the good from the bad? What are things that you look for when you're kind of building into your own team at Doccla?
Yeah, a really good question, and again, another thing that we're working on, right? And there's not like a one size fits all answer. Of course, there are things that are role relevant. But then in terms of personality, don't want to just hire the same person 20 times either. Worse still, the whole kind of unconscious bias stuff. Worse still, if there are 20 people that are like me, it'd be dreadful. Imagine you work with 20 people like yourself. Maybe you got better self-esteem than I do. It sounds like awful. But so no one size fits all thing. But I think one thing is energy.
Oh, nice.
So, and I don't mean that in like a kind of Totnes style, like hippie thing. I mean that in terms of like cadence of output, being upbeat, lifting the people around you rather than dragging them down. So that's you want people that are going to stick their hands up and be that you need to hold back rather than the other way around. So that's a big thing. Hard to test for though, right? Because it's easy for somebody to be upbeat on an interview and then not be afterwards. And actually, some respects in terms of clinical hires, that can be difficult too, because for people who've been dedicated their whole life to their clinical work, and that's where they're putting all the extra time. It's hard to see that on a piece of paper. Like, okay, you were ST3 at George's. I know that's incredibly hard. I know that would have been hard work to get to. But how do I know you're better than the next person at a different trust? Difficult if there are two people going for the same role. So it's hard to locate that in CVs. What I would say is you may feel that the world is overrun with high quality clinicians looking for a role outside the NHS. Please feel free to send them in our direction because the skill set's amazing. We've got some really super high quality folks who are coming from that background, and we love it. And of course, in our business, it makes tons of sense. So I wouldn't say we're overburdened by incredibly high quality doctors who really want to work with us and will drop everything to do it.
Doccla is, one of the leading virtual hospitals in Europe, and I imagine you're expanding rapidly. What are the first things you do when you enter a new country and a new region, right? How do you lock down the first hospital, the second hospital? And does it get easier when you've already dominated in 9 or 10 different other countries, right? I want to know about that process, which I think you have insight to that a lot of startup founders probably won't.
Yeah, so this is a really important, I think possibly an important difference between Doccla and a lot of the other companies that I'm aware of or have worked with. So generally, we've not gone to a new country and set up anything without having a client there.
Nice.
And again, there's a few reasons for that. One is it's hard to get clients in new markets, and so if you go say, right, we're going to do something in Spain, going to go hire a Spanish team, then they're going to sit there working really hard to try and get a client. Maybe it doesn't happen in the first 6, 9, 12 months. You've run up a big bill, and you might end up having to let them all go, and that would be kind of traumatic for everybody involved. Much better, you could normally find an innovative hospital or GP or whatever from a distance. Get that first contract at least nearly cemented, and then build on that basis. And hopefully, if you do a great job, then you'll also start to get referrals from that client, and people will say, you can point to the NHS and say, wow, we're in half of all ICSs and we're doing this great work. But like people in Germany kind of don't really take it seriously unless they're seeing stuff in Germany too.
Exactly.
This is NHS is the world's single largest healthcare system, and they're like, yeah, but it's not Germany. It's a logical vote, Germany, so they still don't want to know. And the same goes for lots of the other big markets. So before you set up a team, win a contract, easier said than done.
I was going to say,
and just be cautious about over investing first in person power. And then the second thing is, we've designed it so that our business model is kind of flexible. If we were to go do a big deal in Luxembourg, now I know nothing about the Luxembourg healthcare system, but I can take a guess that we're not going to want to invest in setting up a big team in Luxembourg because the market's just not there. It's a small place. In countries like that, in markets like that, we can offer just our software, and that means that you can start to kind of get footprint in different countries without having to invest massively in that market before you get there. So otherwise, a lot of the services that we provide in, say, the UK and Germany, it would be really expensive for us to go and set that up for one hospital, right? You benefit from the economies of scale of sharing that across 50.
Definitely. One of the, I don't know if it's a problem, if it's a good thing, but a lot of the problems or challenges founders face, particularly in the NHS, the UK, is kind of this pilots, right? These never-ending series of pilots, founders struggling to then convert them into kind of a paid contract. Have you experienced stuff like that? And, the question is, at what point do you just say, do you know what, this hospital is never going to bring us on board? We're on our 5th pilot, we keep smashing the milestones. When do you just have to put your hands up and say, do you know what, it's not going to work, let's go somewhere else?
Yeah, so it's really easy to like say this in principle. It's really painful to do this in practice. So in principle, if you're ever going to do something for free, and it's a really bad idea to do something for free if you can get paid even £1,000 for it, like a non back of the sofa amount of money, however small, means that there's at least a route into procurement, and that people are going to have had the necessary conversations to get that money signed off. So that's really helpful, because otherwise, you might find out that they're never going to buy from you ever, because they've actually already got another system booked in for 3 years, and it's just the person who commissioned the free trial didn't have to go ask anybody. This is cautionary tale there, because you can probably tell that's happened to me more than once.
Yeah, I can tell, right? A real
not doing that again. So don't do that. And then the other thing is hit your milestones. If you've got paid the first time around, however much, and you've got a proper contract, then you want to make something in that contract. Ideally, you want to say, hey, if we do this, then you agree that we'll roll into the next phase of the project. Not always going to be possible. Nice. But if you at least have an agreement kind of in principle, if they then say, well, we can't do it, then honestly at that point I would walk away. The idea of extending 3, 4, 5 times, I don't know, maybe you've had other guests on here who say something different and they've had a breakthrough moment after extension number 27. But I don't know, for me, you invest so much time and energy in making these things A grade at the pilot stage, that by the time you're on your 5th extension, by the time you're on your 2nd extension, it's time to go.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of founders, out of sheer excitement initially of running a pilot, do the whole mile, a lot of legwork, groundwork, contracts, only to realize it's just an overzealous champion who really doesn't have the decision making power to kind of turn into like a paid contract of some sort. And it comes to the point of you're reading a lot of articles recently about kind of the health tech companies and the VC dollars. There's no sustainable business models around it, kind of these flash sales, these mergers, acquisitions. Tell us how important it is to nail down a real good sustainable model. And the other question is, what are your thoughts around kind of VC funding, bringing in outside money versus bootstrapping? Because I think a lot of people are having that kind of debate now.
Yeah. So look, clearly it's better to bootstrap if you can bootstrap, but not everybody has the personal capital to bootstrap, and not every business is suitable for bootstrapping. You know, you won't get a new drug off the ground bootstrapping, right? It's not possible to do that. You run clinical trials; it's not happening. Whereas a small kind of MVP on like no code software, yeah, you can bootstrap, shop it around, and then you will benefit from the fact somewhere down the line that you haven't given away a proportion of your company at a cheap valuation at an early stage to a VC. So you'll benefit from that personally, of course. Um, uh, in terms of the importance of a sustainable business model, I mean, yeah, we've seen a real kind of choke point on that recently as VC, or at least all but the very best performing VCs have had a tough time.
Yeah,
Health tech's been absolutely savaged, and in part that's what it did for Babylon, right? You know,
yeah,
as a combination of unpopular business model, call it good, call it bad. I guess you can't call it good at this point, can you? But
no,
unpopular business model. Let's leave it at that. And a complete collapse in health tech valuations leads you into a bit of a death spiral. There's a whole load of other contributory factors
of
there,
course.
but that's part of what happened there. So, how far does that go to answer your question? It's a complete digression, but it's directionally at the question, but doesn't answer it
Yeah,
at all.
no, it's good. And the one question we have, right, is a lot of founders are scared of taking on kind of outside money for fear of kind of the pressures it puts on them. You know, you have to hit milestones, you have to hit certain revenue numbers, which you might be privy to in your role. And this concept of fear of being replaced for this baby that they've built, for this company they've raised, because, you know, the board comes in one day and says, hey, do you know what, you're just such a crappy CEO founder, we're going to replace you with this individual. Have you experienced that? Have you experienced this pressure of having to hit sales targets, having to hit certain revenue numbers?
Uh, yes, of course, but I suppose there's a slight difference here. As somebody who works on the commercial side, you are always under pressure to hit revenue numbers, because it's kind of here. It's what you're here to do. You know, maybe
Yeah.
some composite of revenue numbers plus, client retention, plus client satisfaction, whatever it is. But really, the number that people will care about from you as a commercial person is, well, it's revenue and possibly margin as well, depending on what stage you're at. You at least need to have a kind of defensible gross margin. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, certainly if I sold everything for a tenner, then people would be angry with me, actually. So there's that. But different fees. So I've worked with a few different backers now, and at
Mm.
various degrees of remove, right? You know, and I'm just starting out at Babylon. Did I have dealings with, actually now pretty much I'm a kind of lead investor, and Chris Bischoff, who is a General Catalyst, but was at Shinovik then. Um, uh, Now, yes. Back then, no, not at all.
Mm.
Or hardly at all. So it's hard to compare in some respects. But
Fair.
uh, but these the businesses, and this you have talked about before on this show. You know, VC runs on the 10 companies out of 100 that give you 100
Yeah.
X returns, and so they
Exactly.
are always going to push you for that, and they'll push you to the point that the business might fail. Apart from where there's a really good fit and meeting of minds of the people running the fund and the people running the business. So we're
Mm.
really, really lucky in that, yeah, we get pushed for results, but I mean, Martin, Doug push me for results all day long anyway, right? So there's nothing new about it being invested in that. It's just my job to get results. If I don't get any results, I'm in a pretty bad place.
No, that is fair.
So yeah, whether it's invested or somebody else, you got to get it done.
Can you give us an insight into what a week in your life looks like? So try and hit all these targets. Tell us what Monday, Tuesday to Friday looks like.
Yeah. So now we've got a decent sized team at Doccla in the commercial team. A fair amount of it is, I guess, more of a coaching role. I see it as coaching. I don't know what the team see it as. Maybe they see it as me making unreasonable demands on what are you doing with this client? What are you doing with this? I see we don't have any clients over there. That's your region. Why? Hopefully in a collaborative, supportive way. A bit of time invested in working with folks to create the tools that others will use as well. And by that, I mean things like marketing campaigns, things like what's our new our new way of engaging with target people that we need to within the NHS and further afield. Recently, there's been a lot of time on hiring. So, you've got to maintain this talent density. Pretty much nobody's left the team in the last 13 months that I've been there, 14 months that I've been in the commercial team. Had a head of marketing leave. She's missed Saskia. But so that requires you to interview a lot of people to hopefully pick the winner, and then more recently I've been spending quite a lot more time on guy who runs our UK commercial operation has been doing a great job with the team's purring along, so I've been spending more time on some of our newer verticals, helping to get those up to speed, which has been really fun because it's a bit more spending time actually getting out and meeting prospective clients and talking to them about the amazing things we might be able to do together. So that's the bit that's why you get into sales in the first place, right? So it's been really lovely to get back to doing that.
Do you feel sales is something you can learn, or do you think it's something people are kind of born with, kind of gift of the gab? And what advice would you give to clinicians that are looking to kind of sell their software, their product into the market? Because, the majority of our careers were kind of taught how to do things in a certain way, where I feel sales and negotiating and persuasion is a whole different skill set altogether.
So I definitely think it can be learned. I think the extent to which it's something I'm trying to kind of catch myself out on in the hiring process as well is it attracts often it attracts these wonderful, charismatic, high energy people, right? And they're so great and they're fun to spend time with, and I'm lucky to work with lots of them. So that's cool. But the actual mechanics of putting schools on the doors and selling things is a lot more about dedication than it is about natural talent. It's what's the process? How do you crank the handle? How do you make sure that you're, in the old days it would have been kind of hitting the phones. Now we actually don't think hitting the phones works very well, but the equivalent of hitting the phones, so that can all be learned. That can be systematized. So just having the discipline to do that, to test what works, and then to change once you've found a winning formula and to back it, which is it's actually, that can be one of the hardest things because there's always another person you can talk to. So you always feel in your kind of comfort zone, well, I just keep doing the next thing. Actually making time to pull back and say, did any of that work, or was I a busy fool? Is important because nobody wants to be a busy fool.
No, that's interesting. The final question we have just before we wrap up is, how do you kind of keep your sword sharp? How are you always kind of upskilling, learning? What are the stuff you're consuming? Because the role you play is, I imagine, a very highly coveted and sought after role, right? You're kind of the chief commercial side. Everyone's kind of gearing for that role. How do you keep your sword sharp? What are you doing to stay ahead of everyone else?
Make me nervous, Abdul. Nervous. How do I do that? So the answer is you always feel like you should be doing more. right? So I'm not one of these guys that I wake up reasonably early, I go for a run, but I don't read a business book before breakfast or anything like that. It's not. And I'm like unlikely to start, sadly. I think I'm really lucky to have great people around me in the business. So Martin, who's my boss, who's the kind of original founder of Doccla, and is a fantastic commercial mind. There's a guy called Dennis who's been with Doccla from the early days. He's really one of the absolute best in the business. Effectively, he might, again, depends who thinks what's coaching, right? He might not think of the sessions weekly as coaching, but I do.
Nice.
And that could go for, I picked some of the senior people at the business there, but that also goes for some of the folks who work for me. It goes for all of the folks who work for me. So I guess it would be I'm lucky that those folks who are all reading lots, bringing new ideas, bringing new strategies and methodologies to the table, and I have the great privilege of learning from them, which means that I don't open a book as often as I should. Okay, that's an honest answer.
Yeah, I think the one thing that strikes me about you is there's a sense of coachability from your end, even when you talk about your own team, that you're always approaching it as you're coaching them, helping them to get better, and you instill that within yourself as well. How important is this trait of being coachable?
I think that's really, really important. Yeah, because the idea that somebody thinks they're kind of the finished article at any point is yeah. I mean, the moment you think you've finished, everything changing so fast, you'll be not fit for purpose in a year's time, right? So, knowing that, when we talked earlier around things to hire for, high energy and coachable, arrogance and all the rest of it, so it's really, really difficult to work with that, and really difficult for other people to work with people like that as well. So yeah, it's super important. Maybe the most important. Maybe more important than energy levels.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah, I could get that sense, and it probably explains as to why you've kind of had the career you've had so far. To kind of wrap up, keen to hear what you're looking forward in the future in terms of your own career. I stick around with Doccla for the foreseeable future, and Doccla as a company, what are you looking to do? Are you expanding to the US market, which is every founder's dream right now from a health tech point of view? But keen to hear, the future of Doccla and yourself as an individual.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy at Doccla, so I'm not about to announce my immediate retirement from Doccla on this podcast. No scoop to be had. Not I think that many people would be interested to read it. But yeah, I think it's an interesting point for me to get really, really self-indulgent. In that, do I want to go do this? Would I want to go do this job at a bigger company? Well, maybe not, because what happens is you just do more HR and less sales, and that's maybe not what you want to do with your life. Would I want to do it at a really small company? Well, I benefit from a whole load of, as I say, a whole load of people who are helping me grow where I am at the moment, and I'm also benefiting from the fact that we've got a really good business. It's got product market fit, and that's a very rare and beautiful thing. It's a financially sustainable business, and it's set up for success, right? So it's hard for me to look beyond that and feel anything other than, hey, I've landed in a pretty good place, so let's double down and deliver on the mission. That's but what that what that looks like, if I think, well, what would I do in 20 years time? That's maybe the next 10 years sorted, let's say, but what was it like in 20 years? No idea. Absolutely no idea. Fair. And I'm not doing what I thought I would be doing probably 10 years ago now. Exactly. So I don't know.
Exactly. And then there's the other thing, right? The jobs that people will be doing in 5 years' time haven't even been existed, invented it, right? So the role might completely change. Last thing, what advice would you give to people that are looking to commercialize a startup or a health tech idea, looking to kind of build a sustainable business model, build revenue, who may be struggling, or, just some tips, motivation, or insights?
Yeah, good. Find the funding. It's got to be a golden thread between what you're doing and where the money is. Sad reality of it. 2, no more pilot extensions. Yes. We covered that already.
I love that.
And then I guess 3 is about the person you want to be while you're doing all this stuff. So we talked about coachability, talked about energy levels. What is it that the people that you're working with want from you to make you a person that's going to be a good manager to them, that's going to be a good salesperson for them, that's going to be a good partner to them in the industry. So that's the third thing. People have got to want to work with you, and that requires you to be respectful and friendly.
Yeah, no, I like that and I appreciate that. Thank you, Tom, ever so much for taking the time out to come on here. We had a few technical glitches. I don't know if it will be translated into the edited, clean version, but it's been an absolute pleasure, buddy, having you on the show. I have a good sense as to why you've been successful, and where you are today. And we wish you both and Doccla the best for the future.
Thank you so much, gents. It's been an absolute pleasure. Let's stay in contact. And
For sure.
you've been very flattering in the description. So I'm blushing over this.
No, thank you.
Have a lovely
No,
evening.
you too.
Thanks.
Just